Hello and welcome to From the South, teleSur's daily news show. We start off in Latin America, where all across the region people are celebrating Day of the Dead and honoring their loved ones. In Guatemala, giant kites with intricate patterns and brilliant colors were part of Tuesday's celebrations amid an annual giant kite festival. Guatemalans believe the kites are led by winds and guided by spirits until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when they come down and families meet at home to wait for the arrival of the spirits. Typically, Guatemalans gather around the graves of their lost loved ones and cover them with colorful flowers and candles. In Honduras, families visited Tegucigalpa's General Cemetery Wednesday to honor their loved ones. The cemetery is one of the country's most historic and is the resting place of former presidents and important figures. But it's located in one of the country's most dangerous neighborhoods, which is now controlled by the Mara 18 gang. The government had the site on lockdown to make it safe for family celebrations. Most families use the day to visit, clean, and fix the graves before they have to wait another year to visit their loved ones due to the violence. Peruvians celebrated the Day of the Dead in Lima by singing and dancing for their loved ones. The ancestral ways of the celebration have been maintained with offerings and festivities for hundreds of years. In the Andean cosmovision, life after death doesn't include a final judgment with the notions of rewards and punishment and heaven and hell. Instead, life after death took place in parallel with those who are alive. In order for that coexistence to be peaceful, the living had to make offerings to the souls or animas of those who had departed. The cult to the ancestors revitalizes the relationships that sustain society. Indeed, when you visit the cemetery nowadays, people don't talk about the deceased, they talk about the animas they are visiting, or they ask you if you have an anima to visit, or if you are a tourist or a journalist. Venezuela's opposition suspended a National Assembly impeachment trial and a planned march against President Nicolas Maduro ahead of talks next week aimed at easing tensions. And in El Salvador, former President Tony Saca was arrested with 6 other people over the weekend for stealing nearly $250 million from state coffers. Roughly half of the money was taken out in cash after being transferred from government accounts to accounts of presidential employees who wired them to accounts belonging to companies close to the accused. Several companies connected to a cousin of Saca's were searched under warrant on Monday. Saca, a self-made businessman, was a well-known journalist before becoming president for a 5-year term in 2004. And in international news, just over 2 weeks into a massive offensive, elite Iraqi forces continue to push that has brought them to within a few hundred meters of the eastern edge of Mosul. So far, the offensive has retaken at least 9 villages on their way to Mosul. An EU mission has begun training the Libyan Coast Guard in hopes of diffusing tensions between Libya and refugee rescue boats off its shores. They also hope training will stop attacks by rogue vessels. NGOs working to save migrants off Libya have been shot at by the Coast Guard in the past. France moved more than 1,600 child refugees from the site of the demolished Calais jungle camp to reception centers across the country. France says Britain would be giving refuge to several hundred of the minors. According to European Union rules, Britain must take in unaccompanied children who have family ties. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has chided the United States for halting the planned sale of 26,000 rifles to his country. He called those behind the decision fools and monkeys and indicated he might turn to Russia and China instead for the arms. A report published by South Africa's anti-graft watchdog has called for a judge to investigate allegations of influence peddling in President Jacob Zuma's government. Thousands of protesters took to the streets calling for the president to step down. Zuma has denied any wrongdoings.
The Islamic and the National Forces in the Gaza Strip organized a sit-in protest outside the headquarters of the United Nations in Gaza Wednesday, marking the 99th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, in which Britain pledged a homeland for the Jews in Palestine. The protesters raised banners demanding the British government make up for the crime committed against Palestinians nearly a century ago.
This national action highlights the historic injustice inflicted on the Palestinian people since the infamous Balfour Declaration signed by the British government in 1917. We call on the international community to atone for this massive sin. The Palestinian people will continuously demand their legitimate rights.
On November 2, 1917, the UK Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour sent a letter to Jewish community leader Lord Walter Rothschild, promising the Jewish people a national home in Palestine. The promise was made despite the fact that Britain had no legal right to make it. The letter became known as the Balfour Declaration. Balfour gave no further instructions on how a Jewish homeland would be established in Palestine, but his document authorized the mass Jewish immigration to Palestine and eventually the creation of Israel in 1948. The consequences of the Balfour Project on the people of Palestine have been undeniable and widespread. Millions were expelled from their lands. Over 11 million Palestinians inside Palestine and in diaspora continue to suffer from the unjust British policy, which denied the Palestinian people the very basic right of establishing their own state. Noor Harazin, teleSur TV, Gaza.